Welcome to the March Church History Library's Men and Women of Faith lecture series. Tonight's lecture is entitled Lives of Faith Pieced in Poetry. Brittany Chapman grew up in the Midwest, in the Rocky Mountain West, and on both coasts of the United States. She attended Southern Virginia University before transferring to Brigham Young University, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in humanities. After teaching in English in Taiwan, working with children with special needs, Brittany pursued a master's degree in Victorian Studies from the University of Leicester in Leicester, England. She works in the Library Division of the Church History Department and specializes in 19th century Mormon women's history. She is co-editor with Richard E. Turley Jr. on the 7-volume series, Women of Faith in the Latter Days. Keep your eyes open because the 3rd volume in the series will be in the bookstores in the next few weeks. As she has studied the lives of Mormon men and women, Brittany has found poetry to be a vibrant source of historical and biographical information that enriches our understanding of past relationships, experience, sentiment, and conviction. Everyone who meets Brittany instantly hopes that she will become a lifelong friend. I am honored to have known her for the past 3 years. Welcome, my friend, Brittany Chapman.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be with you today and a privilege to speak in this historic building. So, let's begin. In pre-literate societies, civilizations often looked to storytellers and to poets for the history of their people. Some of mankind's oldest literary creations are epic poems, such as Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which preserves a mythological history of Greece. Beowulf, written in Old English, captures the legendary heroism of that revered leader of the Anglo-Saxons. In his Metamorphoses, the Roman poet Ovid encapsulates a mythico-historical chronicle of the history of the world from its creation to the reign of Julius Caesar. An epic poem that preserves the history of the Finnish people is called the Kalevala, an oral tradition which could be as old as 1,000 years before Christ. For many, many centuries, the stories in the Kalevala were passed down in song or ancient runes. Each generation would be taught the primeval poem put to music by the generation before. It is said that the rhythm of the poem was set to the rhythm of boat oars as the early peoples traveled from place to place. The epic poem played an instrumental role in developing Finnish identity and in preserving their language. In the early 19th century, a forward-looking physician and others traveled to remote Finnish villages and transcribed and published the Kalevala in 1835, so the oral folk legends would not be lost by time. The last living rune singer is said to be Jussi Hovinen, who learned the stories of the Kalevala from his parents, who in turn learned it from theirs, back on for millennia. He lives today in an isolated Finnish village, and this clip is taken of him just last year singing this ancient epic poetry.
Kolme on koko morsionta, yhden niityn niitännässä. Mimpon niitti sen haravoi, kaikki karhella veteli. Tuhansilla tukkusilla, satasilla, suoprasilla.
Given the rich sense of history left to the world through poetry and its lasting capability to connect generations, it is surprising that it is often overlooked as a source when compiling history today. The tradition of capturing life in poetry was strong in the 19th century. If one is willing to stretch beyond the traditional sources of autobiography, journals, other archival records, and history books, one may find that poetry, including song lyric, can be a powerful historical ally. It gives insight into the past in dynamic ways and can help us piece together what it meant to be in eras gone by. In the 19th century, for example, poetry kept pace with daily life as people often honored relationships, recorded personal experience, expressed conviction and sentiment in verse. Tonight, we celebrate poetry in these 4 areas to give us a rich peek into the past. Those 4 areas are poetry as a story of relationships, poetry as a biographical record, poetry as a medium of conviction, and poetry as a tool to express sentiment. Poems can give us insight into relationships between people that otherwise may have been lost. Let's take, for example, Barbara Matilda Neff Moses. She was born in 1822, the eldest child of a well-to-do family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. She and her parents joined the church in 1842 and visited Nauvoo in 1844 with a view to move there soon. They returned to Pennsylvania 6 weeks before Joseph Smith's death. Barbara married Julian Moses in 1845, a man she had known as a missionary in the eastern states. The Neff and Moses families arrived in Nauvoo in 1846 and migrated to the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. They built successful, faithful lives in the Mill Creek area. Barbara kept a stunning autograph book, which, gratefully, has been donated to and is preserved in the Church History Library. Autograph books were a big deal in the Victorian era and beyond. Men and women kept beautiful books devoted solely to the purpose of collecting friends and occasionally famous persons' remembrances, words of wisdom, and sentiments, which were most often set to rhyme. Some signers would include beautiful artwork, like we see in Sarah Kimball's autograph book on this slide. We carry a remnant of this tradition in our high school yearbooks. Friends tell us how awesome we are, share memories, and give timeless advice. I'm sure you can think of some, like stay cool and never change. And autograph books were along those same lines, but slightly more sophisticated. Barbara Neff Moses began her autograph book as a young woman and took it with her on her 1844 visit to Nauvoo, where she had a number of early church leaders sign it, including Joseph Smith. Here is his rather endearing inscription. It's in the center, and you get to see his poetic ability. He says, "The truth and virtue both are good when rightly understood, but charity is better, miss, that takes us home to bliss, and so forthwith remember Joseph Smith." Barbara gathered inscriptions in her autograph book throughout her lifetime, and someone even continued it after her death. It includes the signatures of the first 8 presidents of the church, from Joseph Smith to Heber J. Grant. There was a poem in her autograph book that caught my attention, not only for its intricate visual beauty, but for its tone of friendship and personal interest. It was written by Wilford Woodruff. I felt there was a story behind it and sought to find Wilford Woodruff's connection to the Neff family, which did not take long. Wilford Woodruff kept a daily journal from 1834 until his death in 1898, tracing nearly the entire spine of early church history. I searched for entries referencing the Neff family, and a narrative unfolded that I would not have known to pursue without this poem. The Neffs first appear in Wilford Woodruff's diary in August 1843, a little over a year after they were baptized. He met them while serving as a missionary in the eastern states. He became well acquainted with the family, and they were, quote, strong in the faith, as Wilford Woodruff described them, and generous with their means. Elder Woodruff noted that Barbara had a correspondence as early as 1843 with her future husband, Julian Moses, who was another Eastern States missionary. with Woodruff. The church was raw and young, and opposition was fierce, especially for a young woman like Barbara. When Elder Woodruff wrote his poem in Barbara's autograph book, he had been visiting with her family for several days. He was so proud of his work, in fact, that he recorded it in his own journal. The Woodruffs and Neffs kept up their acquaintance in Utah, and nearly 50 years after they met, Wilford Woodruff spoke at Barbara's funeral, and later at her husband's. This is the poem that Wilford Woodruff wrote to Barbara when she was a 21-year-old unmarried woman in Pennsylvania. It is filled with the excitement of new religious truth. It is apparent that they saw themselves as separate from the world for accepting that truth. And Elder Woodruff's poem rings with the importance of leaving Babylon and gathering with the saints in Zion, which the Neff family had not yet done. You can see that the poem is written as an acrostic. If you read the first letter of each line vertically, it spells Barbara Matilda Neff. Joseph Soderborg will be the voice of Wilford Woodruff this evening and read the poem to us.
The church has a audio recording of Wilford Woodruff's voice made in 1897 on a wax cylinder, and so I listened to that to try to capture his essence, and this is what I got. Anyway, in 1843, he wrote, "Behold, there's glories within thy reach, O virtuous maid. Ah, maintain thy faith, for this generation will fade. Round thy bower salvation and peace shall twine. Blessings surround thy head through the new covenant divine. Attend, O Barbara, to that truth and that light. Round thy path it has shone by day and by night. And to the brightness of its rising, kings shall come. More blessed than most of thy sex thou art, as few have made thy choice, which is the better part. Turn not to the Gentile glories for thy peace or joy. Inspiration has told their doom. They fade, they die. Lean on thy God, let Zion be the joy of thy heart. Draw near her assemblies, and with them share thy part. All nations who are wise will make her dwelling place their home. Not all the Gentile world the hand of God can stay. Escape from her woe. She has passed her safest day. Fly from her midst, for God has marked her doom. Flame and sword are near. She sinks, but Zion is thy home." Wilford Woodruff, October 7th, 1843.
Thank you. One of the central benefits of poetry is that it can serve as a biographical record, documenting experiences that may have been left out of more formal records, like an autobiography or journal. They often capture the fun and creativity of the author in addition to recounting events. Ruth Mae Fox is one such author. She kept a diary for a number of years and wrote a 60-page autobiography to document over 100 years of life. This leaves many experiences untold. Gratefully, she also wrote poetry. From her poems, we glean insight into life events that she did not record elsewhere. Ruth Mae Fox was born in Westbury, Wiltshire, England, and emigrated with her family when she was 11 years of age. They arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in 1867, and Ruth married Jesse W. Fox, Jr. when she was 19 years old. She stepped into the public sphere in the 1890s and became a suffragist and women's activist. She became a member of the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association General Board in 1898, now named the Young Women Organization. Ruth was called as first counselor in 1905 and served as Young Women General President from 1929 to 1937, from ages 75 to 84. A thing she often joked about, being so old and leading an organization with the word young in its title. She considered her crowning role was that of wife and mother, and she bore 12 children. Her youngest daughter, Emmeline Blanche Fox, was named after one of Ruth's mentors, Emmeline Blanche Wells. They called Ruth's daughter Bee. When she was 5 years old, Bee contracted scarlet fever, which weakened her heart and caused her to develop rheumatic heart disease. Her condition continued to worsen in her adolescence. In the hopes of recovering Bee's health, Ruth suspended her church and civic activities for 8 months and took Bee to Ocean Park, California. As the name suggests, Ocean Park is on the beautiful, warm beachfront of Santa Monica, just outside Los Angeles. Bee thrived in this new climate and new environment and gained health and strength. In about January 1911, she wrote a postcard to her brother Frank, who was serving a mission in the Central States. She wrote, "Dear brother Frank, I am so well now I don't know what to make of myself. In the few weeks that I've been up, I have improved wonderfully. The doctor said that if anyone had told him 8 weeks ago that I would be as well as I am now, he wouldn't have believed it. It used to be that every time I would exert myself a little, why, my heart would fly all to pieces. But now it don't seem to even make me breathe faster. For Christmas, I got about 40 presents. Can't name them all. Your loving sister, Bee." Ruth wrote very little about this experience with Bee in her personal writings. She devotes only 2 sentences to it in her autobiography, and her journal skips over the months she spent there. We are left with very little information about their experiences in Ocean Park. Gratefully, Ruth wrote a poem about her day-to-day life in Ocean Park. She likely included it in a letter she mailed to members of her family living in Salt Lake City. Those members included Jesse W. Fox, her husband, who watched over their daughters still living at home, Florence, age 16, and Lucy Burrell, age 20. Florence writes about how seriously his father took his new role as a single parent while Ruth was away with Bee. When Flo asked if she could go over to a friend's house, her father would thoughtfully chew on his mustache and say, "I think you better stay home tonight." She quickly discovered that if she told him she was going over to her friend's house, he would say, "Okay, have a nice time," or "Be home by 9 o'clock." Daisy, Ruth's oldest daughter, lived in Salt Lake with her husband, Abe, and their 4 children. Jetty, Ruth's oldest son, his first name was Jesse, but they called him Jetty, lived with his wife Rena and their children, and he worked for the Nabisco Cracker Company. Lester Fox was married to Kathy Evans, and their oldest daughter, Catherine, was 1 year old. Vida was a newlywed to Chester Clausen, and finally, her third oldest child living in Salt Lake was George, and he lived with his wife Lizzie and their children in Salt Lake. Their other children were in different areas of the country at the time of the writing of this poem. Sister Naoma Eastley will be the voice of Ruth Mae Fox as she recites Ruth's poem, "The Difference," which contrasts the lifestyle she and Bee enjoyed in California with the life back home in Utah.
The Difference by Ruth May Fox. We breakfast here at 11:30. At home, we should at 6, with lots of fuss about kindling wood. Out here, we don't use sticks. We eat just when we want to eat and go to bed the same. We get up just when we darn please. Oh, I'm glad we came. We don't have any dinner bell, and the doctor is far away. I'm glad he doesn't live next door, or I would die or pay. There's no one here to scold at all. No horse to run away, no chicks to feed, no socks to darn. Who darns them, by the way? I needn't sing the old sweet songs to keep my temper down. Of my own self, I'm simply queen. Most all I need's a crown. And all is peace when B's all right, and she will be, you bet. The past will vanish like a dream, and yet I can't forget. Everybody out but me? My gosh, this is a fright. It must be 1 or 2 o'clock. Oh, there, they left the light. Ain't my breakfast ready yet? I'm due uptown at 9. The coffee's thin, the eggs are hard. It's like that all the time. But then, poor Papa's getting old. It strikes me nearly dumb to think that he should be tangled up with 2 who feel so young. Flo, go upstairs and get my book. It's getting awful late. Well, Slowpoke, ain't you gonna budge? I must be there at 8. Where is the car book? Flo asks, hiding a little tear. I knew that Burl would make me late. I wish my ma was here. Mercy sakes, can't find my hat. Confound that blamed old cow. Pa went and let her loose again. Darn it, I won't go now. Poor Daisy worries about her house and works like that old scratch to keep the house and children clean. Oh, Abe, you found your match. Jetty is the same old clock, just wearing out his legs to keep the crackers rolling out and the family on its pegs. Lester doesn't have time to stop. Can't even send a card. But he's teaching Catherine how to walk, and collecting's awfully hard. Dear Vida's path is strewn with flowers. No thorns, as yet, appear. And Chester's days are fair and bright. It's often foggy here. Oh, Kathy, Lizzie, Rena, my heart goes out to you. Your job of raising foxes, I hope you'll never rue. And then there's all the little chaps. I see them as they run. I love them too, though far away. God bless you, everyone.
Thank you. Poetry, with its creative freedom, with its structure of rhythm and rhyme, provides an elastic medium for the expression of conviction that somehow cannot be matched by prose. With its popularity in the 19th century, poetry was a meaningful medium for people to express things they really cared about. Effective poets were community celebrities, and recitations were a natural part of parties and celebrations. Poems were often written to mark occasions and to honor achievements and people. Culture was rich with rhythm, rhyme, wit, and emotion possible through verse, well-written and otherwise. Newspapers in the 19th century were riddled with poetry. The Woman's Exponent, the Mormon Woman's bi-monthly newspaper, was no exception. For much of its history, at least one poem graced the front page of each issue, giving space for amateur and experienced authors to express their sentiments and philosophies, defend strongly held beliefs, and bear testimony in verse. Poetry also provided space for political platforms. Women addressed legislation that affected their families, including well-articulated arguments for women's right to practice plural marriage. The most popular political topic of all, however, was women's equality, the fight for women's right to vote. Suffrage was a topic passionately rallied in poetry. Suffrage represented much more to women than simply the right to stand in line at the ballot box. It meant women had an equal voice in society and what occurred around them. With an equal voice, women, they believed, would change the world. They would do this through morality and innate goodness. True equality, including equal opportunity in every aspect and privilege of life, including education, employment, political potential, and so forth. All of this was in their vision for the future of humanity. Incredible progress has been made toward this vision, and for this we owe to their efforts and foresight. Mormon women banded together with the National Women's Suffrage Association and created local suffrage associations to promote equal political rights. The Relief Society also became heavily involved in the cause. The Woman's Exponent published a Utah women's suffrage songbook for women to put music to the stirring poetry of song lyric. Popular women poets in Utah captured sentiments women felt as they fought in so great a cause and sought to gain support for the movement. One of the greatest groups of converts they needed to make to suffrage, however, was not the men. It was other women. Many women were indifferent and did not see a need for change. They had yet to catch the vision of what equal opportunity could offer themselves and could offer their daughters, granddaughters, and their sons and grandsons. One Utah poet craved for women to open their eyes and let their shackles fall as they kept themselves in bondage. Activists craved for each woman to confront her own potential and to see within herself the capability to have an equal voice in all the affairs of life, and they wanted them to rise to that knowledge. Women needed to reach beyond what they could see. That was the other half of suffrage, convincing women that they had the right to vote. Poetry set to music was a tool used to convey that vision to women, not just to the men who served as legislators. One woman with vision and literary talent was Lula Green Richards, a noted poet who became the first editor of the Woman's Exponent at the young age of 23. These powerful lyrics were set to the familiar tune of Hope of Israel, a homegrown Utah hymn aptly encouraging people to rise to their potential. A group of wonderful young women will resurrect this old suffrage song for us And their names are Jen Rathel, Lisa Zimmerman, Eliza Nevin, Jenny Stevens, and Heidi Hatch. The power of poetry united with music in sharing conviction and vision is in this song. And you see the lyrics on the slide.
Freedom's daughter, rouse from slumber, see the curtains are withdrawn, which so long thy mount has shrouded, lo, thy day begins to dawn. Woman, rise thy penance o'er, sit thou in the dust no more, seize the scepter, hold the van, equal with thy brother men. Truth and virtue be thy motto, temperance, liberty, and peace. Light shall shine and darkness vanish, love shall reign, oppression cease. Woman, rise thy penance o'er, sit thou in the dust no more, seize the scepter, hold the van, equal with thy brother men. First to fall mid Eden's bowers, through long-suffering worthy proved, with the foremost claim thy pardon, when earth's curse shall be removed. Woman, rise thy penance o'er, sit thou in the dust no more, seize the scepter, hold the van, equal with thy brother men.
That was so awesome. Thank you, ladies. Let's give them another round of applause. Who knows how long it's been since that song was sung? Poetry is also a tool of expressing sentiment. Some authors in the 19th century leave very little record of their hearts on the page, including their love for others, feelings when disappointments occurred. Life's joys and sorrows may appear to receive very little reflection in personal writings. It can leave us scratching our heads saying, didn't they feel anything? Where are those emotions that help connect us with them as living, breathing human beings in the shared human experience? Ruth Mae Fox is one of those authors. Expression of affection in her personal writings is very sparse. The most emotive entry in her personal writings is the diary entry in which she recorded the death of her daughter, Bee Fox. Despite the Fox's efforts to prolong Bee's young life, she passed away of rheumatic heart disease at age 17. Ruth wrote the following in her personal journal. On Tuesday, February 3rd, 1914, Bee died after suffering intensely for 10 days. 24 hours before death, she asked me to place the pillows so that she could lie down and die. I did, as she requested me, but I used more pillows than she wanted, as she could not lie down. So she said, I told you to lay the pillows low, as I am going to lie down and die. I said, Bee dear, you can't lie down on low pillows. So she contented herself as they were. As she thus reclined, I was feeding her snow and said, Here, Bee dear, is your snow, beautiful snow from the mountain tops. Picking up the words, she said, Isn't it lovely, Mama? Isn't it lovely? white as the snow, pure as the snow. And with a most angelic smile, she repeated, "Isn't it lovely, Mama?" several times. Then placing her hands together, she said, "Thank God." All this time she was looking upward, but she could not die. Her time had not yet come. Raising herself from her pillow, she exclaimed, "This old earth can't hold me any longer." Then she asked to walk. When we told her she was not able to, she said, "You don't know who I am. I'm a lady, and I can walk." Of course, she could not. And so she remarked, "If I can't walk, I'll die. Goodbye, Mama. Do you care?" I answered, "I don't care what you say, dear, so long as you do not mean it," as I did not wish her to know that we had any thought of her dying. And just where you expect her to gush with feeling, she restrains herself, and not trusting her emotions to her journal, she simply signs Ruth M. Fox. Looking solely at her autobiography and diaries, one may think that Ruth is cold-hearted and question her feelings for her family, her feelings in tragedy and disappointment, and the color of her personality that made her who she was. The place her heart is found is in poetry. She wrote a touching poem in her grief for Bee, with a repeating stanza, "She flew, on the wings of the morning she flew, our beauteous Emmeline." She wrote poems congratulating her children for their achievements, celebrating births, sending messages of love, all witnesses of the joy she found in her family. In her later years, she wrote a poem called "To My Children." On May 15th, 1941, she handed the poem to her son, Faramore's young Fox, in a sealed envelope. On it was written, "To be opened after my death." Little did she know she would live over 15 years later. In 1957, at the age of 103, Ruth asked that the envelope be opened and copies of the poem distributed to her family. Later that year, a young man named Arthur Thomas Challis went to interview Ruth for his master's thesis documenting Utah history. He recorded that interview on a reel-to-reel tape. Miraculously, through a series of wonderful events, this recording was uncovered only months ago and brought to the Church History Library in near-perfect condition. On this recording, she recites this precious poem, which I will play for you. She is 103 years old at this point and is reciting her poem, "To My Children," from memory. And I will add, as one of her descendants, this has special meaning to me.
If I should leave this mortal state, the while you think I'm sleeping, do not, I pray you, be disturbed, and lend yourselves to weeping, for I am in my Father's care. His messengers will guide me, and I shall go quite unafraid, with faith and hope beside me. As peacefully I wend my way, I breathe a prayer for you, that he who sent you all to me will joyfully look o'er you. Within the gates I'll wait for you, with a mother's anxious yearning. Immortal is a mother's love, an incense always burning. Amen. Oh, may you clasp the iron rod, which leads to life eternal, that we may all together meet around the throne supernal. There sin and death can never come, but life and love together will be our glory and our joy, forever and forever.
May we look to poetry as a way to connect with peoples of the past, as a way of knitting together relationships, telling stories, and expressing deeply held beliefs and affections. May we also keep a record of our own lives, that generations to come may do the same. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Brittany? If you'll wait for the microphones, just go ahead and stand.
Well, first of all, that might be the best presentation I've seen in my life, so thank you so much. Second of all, I wondered what was like the greatest surprise that you found through all the work that you did?
The greatest surprise. I will tell you one of the greatest surprises I received by listening to this recording of Ruth Mae Fox's poetry. And then as she continued in the interview, I had looked for ages and ages and ages to find out how she felt about plural marriage. After she'd been married for 15 years, her husband took a second wife, and nowhere does she record how she felt about it. In her autobiography, there's just one small paragraph acknowledging that her husband married another woman, and she doesn't even list her name. So, like trying to put the pieces together, how does she really feel? And in this interview, he asks her, "How did you feel about it?" And she laughed and said, "Well, I wasn't happy about it." But we were friendly, and they got along well. They lived in separate homes. And she said, "I profess to be Mormon, and I embrace everything that Mormons believe, so I believe in polygamy." So that was essentially it. And I would like to briefly acknowledge those people who found this recording. It's just amazing and miraculous. I suppose I could tell you the full story after if you wanted, but if Ron Fox could stand, he's no relation, but saw this citation to this oral history in a thesis, tracked down Thomas Chalice's descendants, one of whom was Joy Chalice, if you wouldn't mind standing, and he asked her if she knew about this recording. And she said, "I know right where it is." How often does that happen? And she graciously brought it up to the Church History Library, and the rest is history. So, next question.
Hi, Brittany. I'm a big fan. I'm curious about what you said about the suffragists having to, part of their suffrage movement was really convincing other women.
Yeah.
I think that's really poignant for some current women's issues. But I'm trying to put it together because before Utah had statehood, they had the right to vote in the Utah Territory.
Right.
So did they have much of a trouble convincing the women in Utah to believe that they had the right to vote back, to restore it to them, or was it mostly nationwide?
That's an excellent question. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the history of Utah women's suffrage, women were granted the right to vote in 1870, right after Wyoming, which was 1869. And they were given the right to vote with very little effort on their part. It was just granted through the legislation. And they were, at that time, Utah was more of an independent territory of the United States, so they they were able to grant that right. And then people in the United States were like, great, women in Utah can vote. They're going to vote down polygamy, and that'll be the end of the Mormon Church. But to their surprise, they only doubled the power of LDS people in Utah, which they were hoping would somehow, for some reason, lessen it. So they didn't really like that idea. And so in 1887, the Edmunds-Tucker Act revoked Utah women's right to vote in an effort to kind of balance out the Mormon electorate. And so with that passed, non-Mormon women were very opposed to suffrage because they did not want more power given to the Mormon people. So there was an active campaign against that was really quite strong. And convincing the men really wasn't that much of an issue in Utah. The women were enthusiastic about it. And I would say many of the Mormon women were enthusiastic about it, but many didn't care. Even though they had it before, they may not have used it then and really weren't bothered either way. But definitely nationwide, it was a bigger issue. Thank you.
Are you, as a professional historian, concerned about the fact that we don't write anymore? We don't write letters. I don't think very many of us write poetry.
Right.
Even when we wrote letters, we didn't write poetry. Some of us may keep journals, but as I think about it, I get really concerned that we're not, how many emails do you have to go through to put together?
Exactly.
Is there something we should be doing about all this?
Yeah, and that you raise an excellent point, and one of my greatest fears is that we will be obsolete from history because we live in the digital age, and so far paper's lasted pretty well for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And so I definitely encourage people to print off things. If you write emails, print them off. If you make a blog, print it off. And do your yearly, all of your photos, print them out in a yearly book or something. Because honestly, I have a colleague who says, if you don't write, you're dead. And that's totally true. Once you leave living memory, if you haven't written down something about yourself, you're dead. No one will remember you. So write. And write on paper.
Brittany.
Yes.
May I just say what a thrill it was to hear Ruth Mae Fox's voice echoing in this hall.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. She used to speak in this hall. Wow, I didn't think about that.
It was great. I was wondering, do you write poetry?
In my middle school years, I have a book of poetry. But no, I don't write poetry, but I do keep a journal. How many people here do write poetry? Nice. Okay, you'll live on. That's good.
I'm wondering, in your time in England, did you come across people's reactions to hearing the gospel for the first time or seeing their relatives leave to go to the New World as part of the church, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the most interesting things that I think, specifically in my time in England, I didn't study that particular aspect, but working in the church history library has been fascinating because you get people visiting from England whose ancestors came out with the Mormon pioneers, and any children that were left in England kind of were raised, not LDS, but now are coming to the United States, to Utah, to learn more about their Mormon ancestors. And that's always a really interesting dynamic, to realize just how great the the divide of the ocean was. So.
Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship in the family and how that's affected your life?
In the Fox family?
Yes.
Okay. So my great-grandmother is Lucy Burrell, and maybe I could back up to show you the picture of her. And Lucy Burrell actually moved to Los Angeles, and that's where my grandmother was born, and my mother was born in that area. And I'd always grown up all my life hearing about Ruth Mae Fox and what a wonderful legacy she had left for the family. But I never really expected to connect with her in the ways that I have. As part of my master's thesis, I started digging into her diaries and her autobiography to try and find out more about this Victorian woman in Utah. And so through that, connected with her and was introduced to her life writings and transcribed them, and they will be published eventually by the University of Utah Press, both her autobiography and her diaries. And so I've been able to come to know her quite well, and know that she has blessed my life. So I do know that our ancestors are with us and bless us and open opportunities for us. But I'm very proud of that heritage, grateful for the sacrifices they've made for our good lives. Yeah, and did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, Brittany, I don't know how many in the audience know that she wrote Carry On. A lot of them don't, and some of them aren't familiar with that song, so.
Yes, this is Catherine McKay Jones. She is Ruth Mae Fox's granddaughter, and as well as Marion Jones here. So if you, I don't know if you feel like standing so people can see you, but they grew up with Ruth Mae Fox in their home. And yeah, so there's Catherine and Marion. And yeah, they're very proud of her. And Ruth Mae Fox did write Carry On, hymn number 255.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So when you are looking back into this old history, probably you found some values that are very different from our modern society.
Yes.
So I wonder, what's your strategy or attitude for looking back into this older history? Yeah.
Very good. I really like finding out people's relationships to one another, because I think that's kind of a key in understanding our past, is to find out how people were connected. And so my strategy, I guess, and my interest in looking at the past is looking at people's lives and the stories of their lives, what made them who they were, and how people influenced one another. I think there's definite, women's history is what I've focused on, and there's definitely a powerful heritage there, and a foundation that can be built upon based on their recorded experiences. So as I search for the history, I'm interested in the stories and the things that made people who they were.
Didn't Ruth Mae Fox write that hymn, Carry On?
She sure did. Yep.
And that was when she was Young Women's President?
Yes, she wrote that in 1930 for the centennial of the church. They needed a nice, rousing anthem for the young people to sing. Young people, I'm talking like a, like a past generation. That's what she would have said, the young people. And so for the mutual improvement organizations. And so they opened up a contest for people to send in submissions for a song, for an anthem for the youth to sing at this centennial celebration of the church. And they weren't really pleased with the entries they received, and they didn't feel like any one of them really hit the mark. So Ruth Mae Fox said, well, I'll see what I can do. And so she went to her office and in one afternoon wrote out the text to carry on. And she said it felt inspired because it wasn't her words. And so then she had her secretary type them up. And she came in the next morning and changed one word, and then the text stood as it is now. And Homer Durham wrote the music, and she felt like it just fit together perfectly.
You mentioned the contest where they had submissions sent in.
Yeah.
Do you see anything? Do you see the church doing anything like that in our day and age to kind of preserve poetry as a cultural form?
You know, not poetry.
Music, hymn writing, that sort of thing.
I know that there's a massive art contest, that international art competition that the museum has. So they're kind of capturing history in art, things that were meaningful and important to people through that medium. But as far as other things, I don't know of any active competitions like that are occurring, beyond just encouraging people to keep records and do family history. There is music? Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. Okay, so Relief Society and children's music. I'm sure you can find out more information online, perhaps. Okay, well, thank you again for the privilege of speaking to you. It's been wonderful.